This is going to be a pretty short video. I'm going to be swapping out my brake pads from the stock brake pads to Porterfield RS4's street pads, but they're supposed to be low dust. I'm pretty tired of cleaning dust off of the wheels, and pretty quiet as well. So before we get started in lifting up the car, the first thing I want to do is make sure I open up the access panel to the brake fluid reservoir so I can watch it and make sure that when I press in the brake calipers, I'm not dumping fluid on the inside of the car. So let me take that panel off. So it's pretty simple. The panel comes off just with Allen bolt. And then kind of have to shimmy the panel back. There are a couple of pins in between these two panels. You have to kind of work your way back up. And once you get those pins off, the front panel clips onto the exhaust vents. So I'm going to pull that off now. Once the panel's off, I just will wrap the brake fluid reservoir with some paper towel just to make sure if anything leaks over, it won't get inside the car. And then I'll, watch and make sure I don't. It doesn't do that when I press the pistons in. So the part number. Which one is the front or the back, but there they are, AP 491.12 and AP 961. So Porterfield chamfers their brake pads so they don't squeak. That's another benefit to Porterfields, is they're supposed to not squeak, but actually the stock Elise brakes didn't squeak either. So first step is to loosen the lug nuts on the wheels while the car is down so it's easy to get it off, and then lift it up. I like to do the right side and the left side, because if you lift it from the jack point that's pretty much right at the rear door side, so there. So there's the rear jack point. It's kind of under where the passenger sits. You can lift up the whole side of the car, and then you can do both of the front and the back on one side and then switch over to the other side. So lug nuts, and then I will lift up the car. I'm going to wash the wheels while I have them off the car. So what I like to use is whatever your favorite soap is. I like this no rinse. I don't really like to use it just to wash the car because you can actually easily scratch the finish. But this stuff is pretty useful in cleaning dust off of the brakes and stuff. And I also use it to clean off, bug guts or bird droppings or something. And basically you mix 2 ounces with a gallon of water. So I just mix it up in this spray bottle, and I'll spray it on the wheels, and then I'll rinse off the wheels with a hose and clean off the inside of the wheels. Since to change the brakes, you have to release the parking brake. I like to put these wheel chocks on at least one wheel, and I'm going to put on the front and the back. And that'll keep the car from rolling when I release the parking brake. And then I'll lift up the whole side. So with the car on the side jacked up, you can see hopefully the front and back wheels are both off. Front wheels off. Pretty kind of grimy on the back side. It's not bad, but I'm going to clean that up, and then we'll work on the brakes. Another note is after or before, but sometime during the installation of the new brake pads, it's a good idea to use some 220 or so grit sandpaper and just wipe down the rotor. It takes the old brake pad layer off and removes any contaminants and gives a nice fresh surface for the new pads to bed in. The Porterfield pads, Porterfield actually is a little different than some of the other high performance brake pad vendors. They just suggest driving real gently for about, I think they said 500 miles, and then you can actually really worry about getting into the pads. So 500 miles seems like a lot, but it's some level of low use. There is no bedding procedure. Normally you have to do some pretty high speed stops to warm up the brakes on the rotor and then let it cool down, and then it's bedded, but Porterfield doesn't have that procedure. Front brakes, don't mind the rest, it's because I sprayed the wheels. So the front brakes, really very simple to replace. Replacing the front brakes is really very simple. There are some pins. Get a good shot of them. They'll be upside down for you, sorry about that. But these guys, so those just pop off. Then the clips pop off, then the pins slide out, and then there's a spring here that comes off. These are the pins that come out, so you can see they have this hole in them that the little clips go through, and then this spring sits behind those pins, just like that. The pads didn't slide out, and I'll show you why. But basically what you have to do is there's two big hex bolts, one there that you have to remove, and then the brake caliper comes off. And then I just pulled the hex, or I was able to pry the brake pads off of the piston. So there's sticky material on the back of the pad, and that actually was keeping me from being able to slide the pad up. So what I'll be able to do now actually is I'll get just a clamp, and I'll clamp I'll squeeze the pistons in just a little bit because these pads are pretty new already, and then I'll put this back on and then slide the pads in. So these are the hex bolts that need to be unscrewed to get the caliper off, and then screwed back on to get them back on. Actually, it's pretty easy to push the pistons back in with your fingers, so that's all I did. They don't need, my pads were not very well worn, so it didn't take much. They didn't have to move much. Also, when you do that, if you do have to move them a lot, watch your brake fluid reservoir, because you don't want that to overflow. That would be pretty nasty. The other thing that I like to do is after I change each pad, I go into the car, I press the brake to push the piston back out, and then that leaves me more space in the reservoir for the next set of pads. So I'm going to tighten these down. The spec is 33 foot-pounds, and then I'll slide I'm going to show the comparison between the Porterfield and the OEM brake pads. Okay, the bolts are tightened down to 33 foot-pounds. I didn't mention before, but make sure you put a little blue Loctite on those threads to keep them from backing out. 33 foot-pounds actually isn't a whole lot. Here's a comparison between the stock pads. By the way, the Porterfield pads have these anti-rattle or warning for low pad wear on both sides. On the passenger side on the Lotus, it didn't have them. The driver might. But you can see that the Porterfield pads have chamfers on the edges that keep them from squealing, and then they have this groove in the middle to hold the dust, and the stock pads are just flat. These guys are also supposed to be very low dust and very close to stock braking power. So next step is pretty easy. The pad slides in. I'm going to put a little, they already do actually come with an anti-squeal backing. I'm just going to put a little bit of that red anti-squeal stuff on the back of here and then slide them in just like that, and then I'll show the pins and the springs going in. Alright, so pads slide in. I used a little of the CRC disc quiet on the back of the pads, just kind of in the area where the piston touches. This is really easy. So what you do is you take the first pin, slide it in, make sure it goes through both pads, and you take the spring, put it up underneath. The spring sits underneath the pin, and grab the other pin, and also, make sure you're putting it in the right way. You can't really do this wrong. Put it through the hole, hold the spring down, push it through the spring, and then push it through the other set of holes. There it goes. And it actually clicks because there's a neck in the pin that the spring sits on. So it's really secure. And then I don't know if this is going to show up, but there's a hole in each pin, like I said, and then you put the little clips back through the pins. And then you're done. The front brakes are done. Super easy job. The rear brakes are slightly more complicated. They have a pin also with a spring that holds them in place, but there's a little tiny hole in the back that you have to put a tool in, and then pound it out with a hammer. Then this pin will come out, make sure the spring comes out and you don't lose it, and then the pads slide off. Once the pin is out, and that comes out really easy, the pads slide free, but the back pad is interfering with the hub, or the actually brake caliper behind it. So what you have to do is you have to swing the brake caliper out of the way. This is a 17mm socket. It goes on that nut. Loosen that. The caliper can swing down. Then you can take the brake pad. So this swings out of the way. Then the brake pads basically fall out. These are Brembos, by the way. And then you can't push this piston in. You have to turn it. I bought this tool, the cube, that's supposed to work with slotted pistons, and obviously this one is just got two holes. So I'm going to use a pair of pliers and just kind of turn it with the end of the pliers. Here's a comparison of the stock rear pad and the Porterfield rear pad. You can see again, Porterfield has the slot. It's got the leading and trailing chamfers. Back pads don't have the wear indicator. So again, I'm going to use a little of the red stuff, just put it on real thin on the surface of the caliper, and then put these back in, and then I have to tighten that bolt back down, and then the back brakes are done. So caliper's on. All you do is, see this is kind of sticking out right now, the pin. Just tap it with the hammer in it. There's a neck on the other end of the pin, so it'll come to a hard stop. Make sure you get the spring in there right, and then tighten this bolt back down. It's 33 foot-pounds, so pretty close to what the front is, and then the back brakes are done. And then just put the wheel back on. So both, pretty simple jobs. Actually, it took me probably about 4 times longer because I'm video recording it, but it should be about, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes a corner once you've done it once, and pretty easy. Again, after every time you change the caliper, make sure you press the brake pad or the brake pedal, so you push the caliper back out so that there isn't you don't lose space in the brake fluid reservoir, and it starts bleeding over. That's a bad thing. So, so that's the brake job on a Lotus Elise.